أصحاب السمو، أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب السعادة، أيها الحفل الكريم، تبدأ الآن جلسة بعنوان الإعلام وصناعة شخصية بوريس جونسون السياسية مع رئيس الوزراء البريطاني السابق السيد بوريس جونسون، ويدير الحوار الأستاذ محمد إسلام.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Well, if I can just kick off by saying that I can confidently say that on behalf of everyone in this room and in the country, we're honored to have you in Saudi Arabia. I saw pictures of you at Red Sea, and I hope that your visit so far has been as good as it looked in the pictures.
Thank you so much. Well, it's been an extraordinary visit, and I'm deeply honored to be invited to this event and to Saudi Arabia. And you're absolutely true. You're absolutely right that I've been to the Red Sea. And it was actually a very moving experience for me because I went there 8 years ago. I had the privilege of being invited by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. And I went Mohammed bin Salman. And I went to the site of Neom, and there was absolutely nothing there. And now I look and I see the incredible speed with which Saudi Arabia has been developing these sites. And you have, I think, 12,000 hotel rooms under preparation, the highest imaginable luxury, a kind of James Bond type resort in the mountains, and I can confidently predict that Saudi Arabia is going to be the #1 tourist destination in the world. It's quite extraordinary what you're doing. #1. This is, the sea is blue, 100 different shades of blue. The islands are magical. The nature is sublime, and the potential is enormous. But what I find so humbling as a Brit is the speed with which this has been done. I mean, I must be honest with you. Eight years ago, there was nothing there. Now you've spent $68 billion or whatever it is, I think a bit less. We've spent almost $100 billion, and we still can't build one railway in the United Kingdom, and we're cancelling part of HS2. So I think there's a lesson for us in the sheer speed with which you're doing things. And I feel that Saudi Arabia is a country where things are happening, and happening with incredible speed and decisiveness. And we need frankly to learn that in the UK.
Do you know why that is, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I do. It's because you have a decisive leadership here in Saudi Arabia that had a very clear vision, the 2030 vision, for how the country can change. And you're getting on and doing it. And the change is amazing. 50% of the economy is now, I think, non-oil. Incredible speed with which you're doing things. When I first came to Saudi Arabia, women couldn't drive. Look at it now. I think I'm right in saying that in the Saudi tech sector, 35% of the workforce is female. 35% of people in the Saudi tech sector are female. In Silicon Valley, it's 28%, and in Europe, it's 21%. So, you know, eat your heart out, Elon Musk and everybody else. Look at the speed. Look at the speed with which things are changing in Saudi Arabia. This is being driven by vision and by leadership. And frankly, we in the UK need to learn from this. Honestly, you look at the HS2, the railway I was talking about. Guess how many miles of high-speed rail the Chinese have built in the last 15 years?
10,000.
25,000. 25,000. Guess how many miles of high-speed rail have been built in the United Kingdom, where we invented the railways. We invented virtually everything. We invented the railways. We built zero because of the planning problems, because of the lack of political will, and because of the lack of leadership. So I look at Saudi Arabia today, and I see a country that is really making change very, very fast. And I think we, in all humility, need to learn.
Thanks a lot, sir. That really means a lot coming from you. If we can shift for a second the conversation about your journey. Your background started off in journalism,
yes.
Which gave you, I'm sure, a deep understanding for storytelling and public accountability. How did that experience shape Mr. Johnson, the person? And what challenges in politics, particularly in perhaps handling transparency, messaging, and public trust, did you face the most?
I think that in a democratic society, you have to get out there and tell the public the truth as fast as you possibly can. I think one particular challenge we all now face is the difficulty of social media and how it can kind of distort people's appreciation and understanding of the world. So I have a bad habit, which is when I want to write something and I'm sitting at my computer, I go on YouTube just to sort of clear my, just a vegetation. And I click on the YouTube to see what videos it wants to send me. Do you know what I mean? Does anybody use YouTube? You know what I mean by YouTube. Everybody uses
I think we all do.
Okay, right. So when I go on YouTube, I find that it always gives me extreme skiing and Keith Richards talking about the guitar and great rugby tries and why Vladimir Putin is going to lose in Ukraine. It tells me what I want to hear all the time. It knows what I like, Peter Sellers' Pink Panther jokes. It knows what I like, and it confirms that. And I think everybody going on social media they're getting a confirmation of what they already believe. And I think the media has a responsibility to try and put the facts out there and allow different opinions and different views.
Any particular moments in your media career that influenced your decision to enter politics?
Yes, I can tell you what it was. I was a journalist for a long time, and there was a prime minister called John Major, who was a very nice guy, and I wrote a piece really attacking him. And I came down and I read this piece in the office that morning. I was about 35, and it was so horrible and so brutal to John Major, who was a nice guy. I thought, why am I doing this? Why am I being so cruel to this man who is only doing his best for his country? And I thought it was unfair. And journalism is a very privileged existence. You sit there, you have an expense account, you fly club class, or you used to, maybe not anymore, but you used to. And you chuck your rocks over the garden wall, and you hear the tinkling of the glass in the greenhouse, and you hear your neighbor's windows smashing. And it can be an irresponsible profession. You can tear things down, but you don't have to create. And I felt I should put myself in the firing line and try to make a difference. And so that's how I became a politician. I stood for election in Wales, and I got very badly beaten. And I stood again, and I won. And that's the system. And I think it was, I've never regretted it at all.
With how media can often be polarizing, could be misinterpreted due to fragmentation, etc., how can political leaders effectively communicate their message while trying to overcome that misconstruction, if you will?
Yes, I think that's incredibly important, and I think political leaders have got to engage. And I think His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz just made an incredibly good point about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. You've got an amazing story to tell about change and development. Saudi Arabia at the center of the world. Today, yesterday, Saudi Arabia was hosting very important talks for the world between the United States and Russia. Now, you need ways of engaging with the public about what is going on. And you need to be out there on social media explaining what is happening. And Donald Trump, whatever you say, has found a way of communicating with people that is very direct, that reaches them, and that they like. And so you've got to be out there. So my message, my answer would be, today, when you've got a great story to tell, you can't rely on other people to tell it for you. You've got to tell it yourself. Saudi Arabia has got a great story to tell. Make sure that you tell it.
Thank you for that. You, sir, wrote a book, Unleashed.
I did, yes, I forgot to mention.
I'm yet to read it, but I will after this.
You definitely should.
Everybody,
I should say, I don't know why I didn't mention that earlier on. Everybody should read Unleashed forthwith. It's available at all good bookshops.
I promise you I will.
It's surprisingly short. It's 730 pages, but you'll read it very, very quickly, I promise you. I think there's a version coming out in Arabic too.
Oh, lovely, amazing. You offer a deep look into your personal life and your career. What inspired you to want to write a book at that moment in time on yourself? Well,
I just thought it was a good idea, but I've got to tell you that the publishers were desperate for something. They said they wanted a book. They gave me what was, by my standards, a serious inducement by way of an advance, and so I thought, why not? And what I was trying to do was explain a story about believing in Britain and believing in my country. And it's a story about Brexit and everything that led up to it, about leaving the European Union, about taking back control, but it's also a story about unleashing the potential of the whole of the UK. So it's about what I was trying to do throughout my career as a politician over about 15 years or more. And so in London, I don't know how many of you have visited London, but London had an incredible success during the period when I was mayor, and a lot of the areas that were poorest were greatly lifted up out of poverty. We invested massively in transport, as you're doing here in Saudi Arabia. We invested in areas that needed regeneration and change, rather like you're doing here. And we saw prosperity levels rise across the whole city during my 8 years as mayor. And what I wanted to do as Prime Minister was to unleash the potential of the whole of the UK, particularly with infrastructure projects and education, which is so important, and much else. So I tell that story. And the UK is actually changing and has massive, massive potential. But I also tell the story of why it was important to come out of the European Union. And it was. Because if you look at the growth rates, compare the growth rates of Europe, the EU, with those of the United States, you can see that the EU model is over-bureaucratic, over-regulated, over-taxed, and is not producing growth. And we in the UK needed to be out of it. And look at what happened the other day in Paris. We talked about AI just now. Look at what happened at the AI summit in Paris, where the US and the UK actually didn't sign up to the European approach on AI, because we don't want an over-regulated approach. We want to do things differently, and we don't have to sign up to the European Directive on Artificial Intelligence, and that's a good thing. I tell you, Brexit was also very, very important because it enabled us, for instance, to vaccinate our population much faster than other European countries, because we came out of the European Medicines Agency and we were able to approve vaccines much faster. I mean, it's just a small example, but it mattered hugely at the time in 2021 because, you know, we had about 1,000 people dying every day, frightened people dying every day from COVID. And it was of huge benefit to vaccinate them quickly. So I wanted to tell that story in the book. And it's a story about, really about unleashing the potential of everybody in the UK. I think that the government has a job to do with infrastructure, with health, with sanitation, with all those things. But then you've got to encourage the private sector to come in and deliver the jobs and the opportunities. That's the formula. And by the way, you see that completely in Red Sea Global, the place I've just been. You know, it's the government of this country that's putting in the infrastructure so fast, and then it's the private sector that's generating the long-term economic prosperity, the jobs, and the growth.
Boosting the local economy as well.
And boosting the local economy, sure. Yeah. And boosting the world. I mean, this is going to be, I think this is going to be an asset for the world. I think it's going to be so successful that you're going to have a dilemma. I mean, just putting it out there, you're going to have a dilemma, Saudi Arabia, about how to cope with this success. Because everybody is suddenly going to want to come to Saudi Arabia. And I don't know what you're going to do about that.
Over 40 resorts planned at Red Sea
Yes.
Global. It's a big number to go from
Yes.
0 to 40 in a matter
Yes.
of years. Looking back at your career, Mr. Johnson, do you ever think, I don't want to use the word regret, but would you
Yes.
have done anything differently in hindsight?
I think when I look back, I think what I would like to have done is somehow stop the whatever happened in the lab in Wuhan, or the bat and the pangolin, or whatever it was that led to the outbreak of COVID. That was a disaster. And that made things very difficult for me. I had the problem of trying to cope with my backbenchers. That's the Tory party in Parliament, when I couldn't even see them for about 18 months. I couldn't meet them. It was very difficult to, I was very lucky when I was mayor of London, because it was a bit like being a sheikh. I was in charge. I was a monarch. It was a monarchical system, such as, and I saw huge benefits in that system in London. Nobody could challenge me. I said, I want to build a bridge. The bridge got built. It was fantastic. When I became Prime Minister, I had backbenchers who were very difficult. And, and it was particularly difficult when I couldn't meet them. And they were all on Zoom. And they were on Twitter the whole time. And they were reading these terrible things about me on Twitter. I never go on Twitter, so I don't know what they were reading, but it wasn't good. And I think that was so I regret, to get to your point, I regret not really being able to interact with them enough.
Back to Saudi Arabia, if we take the pillars of Vision 2030, or a few of the pillars of Vision 2030, we have culture, big investments happening in the culture world, in the sports world, in the tourism world, in the entertainment world. Has what we are doing here in Saudi reached the shores of the UK by way of...
Not enough. This is my point. No. Come on, Saudi Arabia. Your story is incredible. But I'll be honest with you, I think there was a media campaign in London over Christmas saying, come to Saudi Arabia. And by the way, that's why I decided to try and bring my family on holiday here, because I thought, my God, this is amazing. This thing that the Crown Prince told me about 8 years ago, it's actually happening. And so I've come to see for myself. But if I may respectfully, humbly say so, the story here is so good and the ambition is so huge that I think there needs to be a more, speaking as a consumer of news in the UK, I think we need to understand more clearly in the UK, in the United States, across the whole of Europe, the whole world, what amazing things are happening. It won't take long. I think another year, everybody will realize what's going on. But I think when you've got a story like this, put rocket boosters under it. Put rocket boosters under it. This is an amazing thing.
Will you come support England here?
Yes. Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Will you come support England here in 2034 for the World Cup?
Well, of course I will.
Yeah?
Yes, I will support England. I have to be very careful here. I assume if Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland qualify, I will also be supporting them. Let me be absolutely clear about that. As a former Prime Minister of the UK, assuming they, I don't know whether it's clear whether they qualify for the finals of the 2034 World Cup. But this is going to be an amazing thing, the World Cup. And what it will be quite unpopular with some people in Saudi Arabia during the run-up because they will say that too much money is being spent on football. But it's going to be a great investment, like the Expo, which is also the right thing to do. It's going to be a great thing for Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure you're going to get a fantastic event, but also a great legacy from your investments.
Inshallah. On the backdrop of the geopolitical climate in the region, with perhaps the implications of the new US government's foreign policy, how do you feel that the outlook of the region looks as far as peace and stability?
As far as peace and stability? Well, look, again, I think that it's an absolute tragedy what has been happening in Gaza and Lebanon to some extent. I think our hearts bleed for the people of Gaza. There has to be a solution. There has to be reconciliation. And I think what is needed is people of greatness of soul on both sides who are willing to recognize each other's right to exist and to find a solution that finally delivers what the British promised in 1917, which was a solution for both the Jewish people and the Palestinian Arabs. There has to be a two-state solution. And I really think when I hear what President Trump says about turning Gaza into Las Vegas, whatever, the Riviera, come on, donnez-moi un break, as we say this is not realistic. But there is the germ of an idea there, which is that with different leadership, that area could be fantastically prosperous. And with goodwill and reconciliation, there could be a rebirth. And I think what he's trying to say is that it's for the countries in the region, and particularly, I think, for Saudi Arabia, to find a way of helping all that to happen. And the sad thing is that was happening before October the 7th. And Saudi Arabia, I think, is playing and was playing a historic role in bringing long-term peace and prosperity to the whole region. What I believe and hope is that once we've got through this appalling business at the moment, Saudi Arabia will continue to fulfill that role. And I've got no doubt at all that under the leadership of the Crown Prince, that is what is going to happen.
Looking back, how would you hope history will remember your relationship, specifically with the media?
I think that my own relationship with the media has been pretty good. But the point about politicians is they shouldn't have a very good relationship with the media, really. It should be. There should be friction. The media's not there to tell you what a wonderful guy you are. The media's there to hold up a genuine mirror to your doings. Now, all I'm trying to say is that sometimes there are stories around the world where the media are too cruel and too hostile, and there are some stories which are better than people publicly understand. And I think the story of what has happened in Saudi Arabia in the last 10 years more is quite amazing. And I think that a responsible media should be covering it in full and explaining everything that's happening. I remember having lunch with Her Majesty, Her late Majesty the Queen, with the Crown Prince at Buckingham Palace, and she was describing how, this was a long time ago, she was describing how she had driven His Majesty the King around in her own Land Rover. And that was at a time when it was very unusual, actually, even for women to drive, for women to drive even in the United Kingdom.
I remember this.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And today, look at the change. Look at the change in both our countries. And I think a fair and reasonable media would be telling that story.
Can we sign off with these two questions? A message from you to the Saudi people, and finally, a message from you to His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince.
Yes, well, first of all, I want to say to the Saudi people, as someone who's been here quite a few times now and has now taken his young family, I've just taken my kids on holiday here for the first time, you should be so proud. You should be so proud of what your country is achieving. I know this is a very young country and a very ambitious country, and quite right. You should be so proud of what Saudi Arabia is doing. And to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, well, I hesitate to give him any advice since he's been much more successful politically than I have, but to put it mildly, but I would just say, keep going with what you're doing and keep displaying the amazing courage, the political courage that you've shown so far, because as Winston Churchill said, courage is the most important virtue. And I think this country is lucky in having a leader with courage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Really appreciated your time.
Thank you so much.